Hello, I am Shane Brinkman-Davis-Delamore, and this is Code and Optimism, a show where we explore how to solve problems faster with software. Today we're continuing our exploration of the 5 essential elements of modules. This is the second of the 5. Last week we looked at purpose, which kind of sets the stage for everything else. Today we're going to dive into interface. And again, as I'm diving into all of these things, I am just exploring and sharing what I've learned about modular design. I certainly don't have all the answers. I am just taking what I've figured out, stringing it together. Hopefully it is interesting to you, but most of all, I want to have a conversation. So I would love to hear what thoughts you have about good interface design. I would love examples that you've seen of good or bad interfaces. What's that interface that has driven you crazy and that you've had to deal with? Share a comment. So with each of these 5 elements, I've mapped them to these Chinese philosophical elements. And for interface, it is metal that I think matches closest to interface. And these sort of metal descriptor words, I think, align pretty well with interface. Again, this is just kind of for fun, but an interface is got precision, it's polished, it's durable, it's malleable. And I think it kind of fits with the metal theme. So let's dive into actually what good software interfaces look like. So first and foremost, as a user of an interface, ultimately you just want it to be easy. You want to be able to get your job done easily. It should be easy to use, easy to understand, should be well defined and well documented. It should have that sense of being polished. And an interesting little one is it should be hard to misuse. The easiest way to use an interface should also be the correct way. It should be obvious how to use it correctly. That's a good measure of whether or not it's actually easy. And when you get all of these things lined up, the interface will just feel effortless and it'll feel like it gets out of the way and it just becomes a powerful tool that the client can use to get a lot of leverage. Next, interfaces should be minimal. We are going to try to make our interfaces as small as possible. And that's because minimizing our interface size is what's giving us leverage in managing complexity. So we're trying to take this big mess of code and then break off part of it and put it into a module to reduce our code size, effective code size, which is what allows us to manage complexity. Well, how does that actually work? Because we still have all that code in our code, it's just now in a module. And we've actually added some because we've now sort of put this interface in front of the module. Well, the way how this lets us manage complexity is basically all the internals of this new module we can pretty much ignore if it's a well-designed interface and all the other 5 essential elements are met. And as a result, our original program is now just the size of the code remaining plus this interface. What that means is the more we can minimize the interface with respect to, as a ratio, the implementation that we're hiding behind the interface, the more leverage we get. So if we hide 10,000 lines of code behind 5,000 lines of interface, we've at most gotten sort of a 2-to-1 savings in code size in our main code base. But more likely, you're going to have something like 10,000 lines of interface to maybe 10,000 lines of code to 1,000 lines of interface, or even better, 10,000 lines of code to 100 lines of interface, in which case you get 100-to-1 ratio leverage in managing your complexity. And this is a bit of where that magic happens, how you can really make very large code bases that each individual part is quite manageable. It's some sort of 10 to 20 to 30,000 lines of code. There's a sense of precision in the interface from a minimalism perspective, which is to say it is exactly the right amount to get the job done. And this kind of ties into that concept of platonic essential ideals for your module, like we talked about back on the purpose episode. You want to have, when you've got a really clean purpose that is really well defined and sort of the essential solution given the requirements, the interface is going to mirror that. It's going to be precisely the right interface to solve the job, and no more, no less. Which kind of leads to this last little bit. When we're minimizing things, at first there's resistance to minimizing, and then there's excitement and overzealousness, and you will try to minimize it way too much. But you have to balance that back with completeness. The tool needs to do what it needs to do, and it needs to do it fully. You don't want to minimize it so much that it can no longer do its job anymore. So there's this natural tension between minimalism and completeness. Durability. Now, when I was going through trying to think of how does metal apply to interfaces is even a good analogy, and I just was stumbling over descriptions of metal, and then durable came up, and I was like, oh, durable, that sounds kind of nice. How does that fit? And then I also saw malleable come up, and I saw this definition of malleable, which is able to be pressed permanently out of shape without breaking or cracking. And this suddenly clicked for me. Of course, interfaces are durable and malleable, much like metal is, in the sense that one, interfaces are the slowest part of your module to change. Because if they change, that's what actually impacts clients. You will change the implementation much faster than the interface. So they are the very durable, enduring part of your module is the interface. But they're also malleable. They're malleable in the sense that a well-designed interface will be designed for extensibility. It'll be designed in a way that you can do either patch or minor version changes, which is to say extend the interface while maintaining perfectly clean backward compatibility. That is how you're going to make a module that's going to live for a long time and have a lot of life and the ability to sort of respond to changing requirements. And I imagine we'll talk more about that in future episodes. But that aspect of designing for extensibility is something that is going to not immediately impact your first wave of clients to your interface, but it'll allow you to keep this interface relevant for the long haul. The last major element of good interface design, I think, is this client goal focused. The interface is focused on the users of the interface, the places that interface is going to get used. And as such, it's not focused inward. It's not focused on the implementation. It is 100% trying to do the best possible job for the clients, irrespective of what the implementation looks like. It should not be focused on features. Features are one set of strategies to achieving a goal. They're never the only possible set of strategies. It's not technology focused. It's not about what the cool technology is. It's not driven by cool technology. It's, again, driven by the needs of the client. And most of all, it's not implementation focused. And in other words, this is kind of how interface and encapsulation interact with each other. And encapsulation being the third of the 5 elements, which we'll be driving into next week. In a certain sense, the interface should obscure the implementation details. It should almost go out of its way to make sure that it's obscuring as much implement details as possible. This is the semantic equivalent of the syntactic ratio of implementation size to interface size for leverage. So purely just measuring your interface size versus your implementation size, which is sort of a syntactic measure, is one way of looking at the leverage you're going to get for complexity. Well, how much implementation details you can obscure versus how simple and minimal and clean you can make your interface, that is the semantic leverage you're going to get in managing complexity. And in particular, this last little bit I think really helps. Interfaces should drive the implementation, not the other way around. When you're designing your module, particularly if you're taking some existing code and you're trying to bundle it up into a module, which I'm going to argue later when we talk about how do you actually do this process of making modules, that's usually the right way to get to the point of building a module, as you are going to build it out of existing code that you've now realized should be a module. But the thing you want to be careful about there is you do not want to have that existing chunk of code be the thing that then defines your interface. You want to take a step back and say, what are the needs of the clients of this interface? What in an ideal world, given infinite time and space and the best computer science has to offer, would this interface look like to solve these clients' needs within this specific set of requirements we've laid down? Design the interface that way, and then say, does this implementation serve that interface? Because again, we don't want to expose anything about implementation to the clients. We want to give the clients the best possible experience to get their job done quickly. And by clients, I really mean code clients here, even though it sounds like it's people. So, in some way, summary, the takeaways. It is a good interface is easy and effortless. And effortless is perhaps the better way to describe it. It should disappear. It is that magic moment when the tool disappears and becomes a natural extension of your body, is sort of the physical tool analogy. But in the software sense, the tool disappears and it just becomes as natural as a for loop or as a function. And you've got all the powers of whatever this particular module does. It should be minimal and complete. And that's what's going to give us leverage as we're trying to manage the complexity of our source program. It should be durable and malleable, and that's it should be designed to be durable and malleable. It should be designed to be able to evolve over years and years. And that's mostly thinking about extensibility, but there's other things which I think we'll dive into in the future. And it should be client goal focused, as we just were going into. It should be focused on what does the client need, not what does the current implementation capabilities dictate it needs to be. We want to obscure our implementation details and focus on the client needs and the client's use. And that's it. That's my sort of high level with the interfaces. Again, I want to invite a conversation around this. I would love to hear examples of good and bad interfaces. I'm just kind of focusing on what's good about interfaces, but I think it's also equally telling what are things that are telltale signs of a bad interface. See if you can think of some of those and throw them in the comment section below. I would love to comment on them. So with that, once again, thank you for spending your valuable time with me. I always super appreciate it. I'm always looking for concise, valuable resources that can level me up. And I'm hoping that this resource can be that for you. If there's ways I can do a better job, if there's aspects you'd like me to dive into deeper, if there's topics that I haven't gotten to yet, I've got a long list, but your input will definitely guide me to a path that aligns to help us, move each other both forward on this vast enterprise of solving problems with software. And with that, I will just remind you that all problems are solvable with enough knowledge.